Welcome everyone to our special Earth Day celebration on virtual science camps. We have Renée-Claude back here, and just as you're getting in, I'm showing you some time lapse of a vermicompost. So we're just going to enjoy that footage while a couple more people join in.
So for those who were with us last week, I was talking about my vermicompost bin where I put my food scraps, and then we have worms that eat all those food scraps. And then when they poop, that becomes new soil. And worms aren't alone in there. Remember that I showed you the mites and I showed you some mushrooms. So here Michael came to the museum last summer, and we did a couple of videos together, and this is one of them. So this was a camera that we set up in a hole in the top of my bin, and we put a little camera in there, and Michael set it up so that there would be a picture taken every minute or so?
I think it was every 30 seconds, and we had it going for about 10 days, right?
Mm-hmm. So what you just saw was the worms eating all of the food and then transforming it into vermicompost.
So it's amazing how quick that goes as well. Like before I was there at the museum, I would have thought it would take maybe a month or two for it to get to that point. Now that was August, so it was pretty quick and things go a bit quicker, but it was amazing seeing compost in live action like that. So what we're gonna be doing today, most of it will be looking at plants and how plants grow. But just before we do that, we're going to spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about carbon dioxide, because that's another important aspect of Earth Day. And yeah, so I'm going to start playing some music for you that I tried to play as you guys entered, but I think it cut off because there was only so many things my computer can do at once. So I want you just to listen to this and think of what this music could represent. It's representing a set of data. So just listen, and then I'm going to ask you to try and describe the trends you hear in it. Okay, so can anyone try and describe what trends you might have heard, and can anyone guess what that might be data of? What was happening with the musical notes there? Can anyone try and put that into words? What was going on? Sure, Jennifer. We'll go to you.
My name is actually Gabrielle. It's
okay,
just
sorry, Gabrielle. Yeah, and you've been here a lot of times before. It's just telling me you're Jennifer. Sorry about that, Gabrielle.
Okay. It kind of sounded like the notes were going up, and it sounded like maybe like something in the water.
Okay, I like those descriptions. So things going up, and someone else, can you describe, was it going up steadily, or was it going up and down a little bit, or can we get a little bit more detail on how it was going up? Okay, it doesn't seem like a lot of people are eager to talk. So I'm going to say, I think for me, it's, well, and I'm the one who kind of put the music together. So I think that the notes were going up and down and up and down and up and down, but with a general upwards trend. And this is a very famous data set. Are there any guesses what kind of data or information this music was a translation of the data for? And I'm gonna share my screen to show you. It's actually an example of this graph, and you might have seen a curve like this before. And this is a very famous curve called the Keeling Curve, after Charles David Keeling, who was a researcher who started measuring carbon dioxide concentrations way back in 1958. And if you look at year by year data, like on the left here, you see it goes up and down and up and down, and we have this yearly cycle. And so if you're only taking data for 1 or 2 years, it doesn't look like the data is going anywhere interesting. It looks like you're just taking a year-to-year cycle. So no one was really interested in the overall trend, which is this upwards trend, which now we can study after many decades of work. So it's one of the most famous and long-term data sets in all of science, this measuring of carbon dioxide. And if anyone's interested how I made that into music, I took the raw data. So here, this is the NOAA website, which is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States government. And they have the data. It's in a pretty awkward form. Like you can get into the data section and you can get text documents of all the data. But I took that and I put it into a program. I think I need to change my screen share for you to see the program I'm using here. Okay, here we go. Showing that. And this is a program called Sonic Pi. And what it is it's a programming language where you can program different music with it. So I took the data set and the notes I played. So these notes 47.1, 52.3, 52.5, and so on. These were the monthly averages of carbon dioxide for about a decade. And that was all I could fit into the player without opening another buffer and a database. But it's kind of a cool programming language. So if anyone's interested in learning programming, then I suggest you check out this program. There will be a link in the accompanying document. And you can play around. There's tutorials for it. Or if you just start with basics, just going to clear this buffer. And you can do things like just play any note and play around, like play 60. That will just give one beat. And then I could play other notes like that. That's not the point of today's session on Earth Day, but it's a really cool program. So I wanted to show you guys that program in case you're interested in programming your own music. Okay, are there any questions on the Keeling curve? It was kind of a really quick overview of it. Excellent. So now we'll get to the part where you guys are actively doing things following along. So the first thing we're going to do is, well, or like the next thing we're going to do, we're going to get to the bean dissection. So I'm going to pass things over to Renée-Claude, who will take most of the lead on it. We're actually going to do it kind of both of us together. But I've only done a bean dissection a couple of times. And if I understood correctly, she's done it a lot of times. So I'll have her take over. It looks like her camera's not on, so I'll go ahead and start it myself. And if she ends up jumping in at some point, we'll have her take over from that. But for this, you need the beans that you've soaked ahead of time. Ideally, you've been soaking them since yesterday, although I mentioned in a reminder today, if you started soaking them this morning, a couple hours should be good. And you'll need a piece of paper to sketch what you're drawing as well. And a ruler. I think I mentioned a ruler on it so that you can measure the bean. And you'll want to be comparing a dry one to one of the ones that's soaked. So I want everyone to get one of their soaked beans out now. And I told you to soak a couple because sometimes you crush one and you might need the other. If things go very well, then one should be enough, but get those ready and we're about to start it. So I'm going to grab mine that's just at the other side of my table. And I don't know if I mentioned, but if you don't want to get your table messy dissecting on the table, feel free to use a plate that you do it on top of. I didn't mention that as a required equipment, so feel free to do it straight on your table, but I'm grabbing a plate as well, so it makes slightly less mess. And as I had mentioned, pardon? As I had mentioned, I'm going to be using a kidney bean because it works easily for it, but it should be able to work with almost any kind of bean. So to start with, and I'm just going to use like a simple camera like this, so it's not zoomed in too much. And when we need more zoom, we'll switch over to Renée-Claude to zoom in more, and she can see things closer than you can see at home. So the first thing I want you to do is compare the one that you've soaked and the one that's dry. And can I get people turning their microphone on and shouting out any differences you see? Like there should be a couple obvious differences. But what are some of the differences between the one that was soaked and the one that's still dry?
size?
The one that's is bigger.
It's bigger. It's a lot bigger. About how many times bigger?
2 or 3.
3.
Some are saying about 3 times bigger. And if I go to measure it, and that's why I said you should have a ruler, because when you're going to do diagrams and study things, it's handy to measure. Mine looks pretty close to 21 millimeters, like just over 2 centimeters for the wet one. On the dry one, about 14 millimeters. So that's about 50% longer, and it's about the same shape, so it's gotten that much bigger in every dimension. So the volume is actually a couple times bigger. And so I'm going to start my diagram. I'm going to draw nice and big what the bean kind of looks like there. And I want you doing that at home based on your bean, not based on my diagram, because I'm not the best at drawing things. What kind of bean shaped, and then I'm going to mention the length there. And I'm going to give everyone about 15 seconds to draw it before breaking open my bean to see what's inside. So you should be making your own diagram at home. Hopefully you won't get your paper wet like I got my paper wet with some of my extra beans. Okay, now I'm going to take my bean and just with my fingers, I'm going to squeeze it and try and break it in half, and it should come fairly easily if it's been soaked for long enough. Mine I soaked since yesterday, and I kind of crushed it there, so it's a good thing I had 2 or 3 extras. I'll get back to this one if I crush the other ones worse, but I'm going to try a different one. And it's kind of good that you guys saw me do that, so you don't need to worry that you did something really wrong if you end up breaking yours. Okay, this one's coming apart a lot more easily.
I have a little tip if that can help.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If you've got fingernails, you can try to tear away the little skin that's on the outside of the bean before you break it in half. And then that way, that'll help you keep whatever's inside nice and intact. So if you're having a hard time, try peeling away the outside layer first.
What did I miss? I went to go get a ruler.
Oh, so all you missed was splitting the bean open. You kind of missed me crushing a bean, so it's a good thing you missed that part. But splitting the bean open, Renée-Claude had the tip that if you stick your fingernail in and you take the skin off first, you should be able to get the 2 halves apart more easily. And so here I've broken mine a little bit, but I haven't completely crushed it, and I can see enough of my detail for later. So I'm going to go ahead with this bean.
And what did we draw on the sketch?
Oh, on the sketch, we just drew the shape of the bean overall with the length of it. So mine I measured, and it was 21 millimeters. If you're using a kidney bean, it'll probably be something similar to that. Like most kidney beans once soaked are between about 15 and 25 millimeters. And we also compared it to the dry one. In my case, that was only 14, but I haven't bothered drawing the dry one because I'm not going to get it open and see much of what's inside. Okay, and now that it's open, I want some people to say some things about what they can notice inside. Like, do you see any details? And if you do, what do some of them look like? And if you have anything to say, just turn your microphone on because it's hard to scroll through all of you while I'm looking at this.
I'm noticing that I have a half that has nothing on it, and then I have one of my halves that has a little something on the inside of it.
Yeah, there's a hole or something in there.
Yeah, you see something? Do you see something sticking out, kind of?
And so I'm going to show you guys on mine in case you're having a hard time finding it. And here, just to show you guys easier, and you can do this with your finger, but you should see a tip that looks almost like a little plant. And it's completely normal if it looks like a little plant, because that's exactly what it is. The bean is going to grow into a plant if it keeps growing. So this part here, and it doesn't show up so well on my camera, so we'll either switch to Renée-Claude's camera, and hopefully most of you are seeing this at home, where you can see it live. But you see this little part here, and that's the embryo of the plant, which is like the baby plant before it's born. It's going to grow into a plant. So it's kind of the interesting part of the seed, where it's got all the genetic material that will make the new plant, and the rest of the seed, and like this half that doesn't even have that in it, then this is just food. So it's something to nourish the plant before it can start making its own food, before it has green leaves to photosynthesize. So I want you to measure the size of the embryo. And it's got a couple of different parts that we'll look at in a minute, and they're pretty small. So on some of yours, you might have a hard time distinguishing them. But I'm just going to measure the length of the longest part of the embryo. And in my case, that's about 6 millimeters. And I'm going to add that to my diagram. So everyone should be adding the embryo to your diagram and try and get as much detail as possible. We'll switch to Renée-Claude with her microscope in a minute, so you can maybe get more detail than you can see with the naked eye. But just draw it as closely as you can.
Is what we're trying to measure the little line on the outside of it?
Well, mine, like it went slightly to the outside, but before I opened up the
This.
let's see.
I think you still need to peel it.
Oh yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I got a few, and in the inside I didn't see anything.
It might be because when you're breaking it in two, maybe the little thing is maybe falling off. So be very, very careful when you open your bean. Kind of pretend like it's like a book that you're opening very carefully, and you'll see on one side something will be on one face, and then on the other face there won't be anything. I think when you were showing it with the toothpick there, I don't know if we could perhaps remove the little thing to show them what they're looking for. I'm going to try to remove it from mine. Aha. So I have it on the tip of my thumb right now. It's just a tiny, tiny little, there you go. That's your baby plant inside the seed.
So maybe can we get a thumbs up either with the reaction button or like putting your thumb up on camera if you've managed to observe this part within your bean?
I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Excellent. So that's most of you. And for those of you who weren't able to see this part yet, we're still just going to skip ahead, but hopefully you can get lots more beans at home and try and find this part later. And this should be something common to almost all seeds of plants. And it's just in beans, it's particularly big and easy to get at for us to see. In some plants, it could be bigger or smaller. So that's one of the reasons why we do this with the bean rather than doing it with like mustard seeds or carrot seeds, which are really tiny, because it'd be really hard to see that. Okay, so from this, we're going to look at what the different parts of this are. Can you guys see it well enough with me holding it close to my camera, or do we want to skip to Renée-Claude, who's got a microscope, to go over these parts? She's okay with that.
Well, we could look at what I have under my microscope here, and that might help those who haven't found it see what we're talking about. What do you think?
Okay, that sounds great. So I'm going to spotlight your camera.
Okay. And I'm going to share my screen. Oops, not this one. Okay. Do you guys see my microscope view of the leaf here?
Well, we have a question. What is the thing in the middle called? So it depends what part of the middle. Like the middle of the embryo, we're about to look at the different parts of the embryo, like the one part that's going to be the stem, then the leaves. But that's not really in the middle of the seed. Like the middle of the seed is kind of the food packet. Do you have a better answer than I do, Renée-Claude?
So I can actually show you a little diagram if that would help. Let's see here. I'm just going to cancel this screen share and share a new screen. Okay, so this here might help you understand what we're looking at. Does everybody see this drawing of the bean? Thumbs up if you do. Yeah, okay. So what we have just been looking at, I'm just kind of going around it with my mouse right now. That's the little baby plant. And so you might have seen the radicle, which is the little baby root, the tigellum, which is in the middle, and that's going to be the stem of the plant. And then this part right here called the plumule, and that is going to make the leaves. And then all of the rest here, like Michael said, is the food source for the baby plant. And now if we look at it using the microscope, so I'm going to share my microscope view right now. Maybe you can guess which part this is. Can you all see this? So this here, what I'm going around with my mouse pointer here, that's just a very, very close-up view of the embryo, of the baby plant that's hiding inside of the seed. And does anybody have any guess about which part this is here that we're seeing? Yeah, go ahead. Theo?
Maybe the end of the little part. Like
that's right. So, what did you say? Sorry?
Like the part that we are seeing the best, like the end of it.
That's right. So what you're seeing right now is actually the baby leaf. And I'll try to move it in a way that we can see other parts of it. Do you see? This is very, very close up of what we're asking you to look at inside of your bean. So again, this is magnified about 20 times. So it's a lot bigger on our screen than it is in our dish. And this little part here, that's the part that's going to make the stem of the plant. The other part we just looked at are going to be the leaves. And now I'm going to move it so that you can see what's going to make the root of the plant. You see this? That is going to make the root. All the way to the end here. Oh, interesting. All right. So that's our baby plant under the microscope. So is everybody able to observe those parts on their little seed?
And so now that you've had a close look at those parts, if you haven't yet labeled them on the diagram, then it would be great to add them onto your diagram. Maybe so they get the spellings. Can we put up the diagram we saw before? Because these are probably new words for most people. And as you're adding labels to your diagram, it's worth thinking that what a seed does, a seed gets... Sorry, are we talking at the same time? Okay, so I was saying, and so again, there you have the words the tigellum, the radicle, and the plumule. And the radicle was the biggest part we saw, because when a seed is somewhere where it's wet and it might be ready to start growing, one of the first things it needs to start doing is absorbing water. So it sends out the root. So even if where the seed itself is dry, if the root keeps growing, it'll be able to get water and some other nutrients for it to grow. Same thing then with the plumule, the second thing. So it's kind of the second biggest thing we see there. It'll need to make its own energy once it uses all the energy of the seed. So that's one of the reasons why the seed is so big. So it's got all the stuff in there, so it has energy to grow the parts out. But pretty soon it's going to need to start getting its own energy that it's making with the leaf. Okay, and I think hopefully that's enough time for everyone to finish their diagram. Can we get people to hold their diagram up in front of their camera so we can see that a number of you have done it? And I'm saying a lot of yours are looking better than mine. It's a good thing. It's a good thing I didn't become an artist, and that drawing is only part of teaching. Okay, those look like beautiful diagrams. Thank you. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to showcase some seeding projects and things that Renée-Claude has started to grow around her home for her own garden.
That's right. So I just need to move a little bit here to bring you to the part of.
Was this where I was supposed to cut to Alan's video, or was that after you show yours?
I think this will work, you know, because we don't have that much time left, so we'll do this quickly.
Sure, yeah. And if you don't need extra time, I might cut off Alan's part just so we have more time.
Okay, so we can't see very much right now because you can see there's a lot of light. I have lights here. Okay, so I'm in Canada and springtime takes a long time to set in. It actually snowed today, and a lot of plants only like to grow when it's really warm outside. But in Canada, our growing season isn't really long enough for us to be able to plant those seeds outside, for them to grow to adult size, and then for them to give us fruit. And that's like for tomatoes and peppers and things like that like a lot of heat. So we have to start our seeds indoors so that they're big enough once it gets hot outside for us to plant them. And so we're able to have a harvest. So if I didn't start my seeds indoors and I planted them out, I might not get tomatoes by the end of the summer. So I'll show you some of my little plants here. So you might notice I'm actually not growing them in soil. So these are cubes of what we call rock wool. And these give a perfect environment for the little seeds to start to germinate. And they don't need soil right away, because as we talked about in the bean germination, as you saw, little seeds have a food reserve for the first little bits of their life. So they can grow without soil for a bit. And then when these are big enough, as you can see, actually I have a bean here right in the middle that's getting big enough to transplant into some soil indoors. Now, when it stops being cold here in Canada, in Ottawa, I'll be able to put my plants outside so they can keep growing in the sun. So I'll show you my tray. Okay, so you can see here, I've got a plastic over a part of it. And when seeds are starting, we don't want them to, they're going to get trapped inside that little shell, inside their little seed coating, and they won't be able to get out. So it's very, very important to keep them nice and moist. Light will help them to grow nice and strong. So you might want to start some seeds indoor yourself. Some good seeds to start indoors would be some tomatoes, some peppers. You could even do beans, but things like carrots or peas need to be started outdoors. They don't like to grow indoors. So we could make our little greenhouse now. Does everybody have materials that we recommended to make a little greenhouse? Yeah? If you don't, that's okay. I don't think I'll need a moment to switch in the end, Michael. We're just going to do this right over here.
Excellent.
It was easier than I thought. So first thing that you need, my friends, you're going to need a little plastic.
Okay, so kind of blocked on her end. I'll start taking over some of the explanation, but I've never actually done it myself before, so hopefully her video starts working again and she can take over soon. So I've got a container here that I already have something that looks like soil in. It's not actually soil because, like a lot of you, I don't have easy access to a bunch of dirt. So this is actually coffee grinds that I've saved for a couple of days. I'm going to use this as soil. And as you can see, I don't have a clear cover, but I'm going to use clear plastic wrap to cover it when I'm done. So I'm going to have a piece that's about the right size, and I'll be ready to cover it with an elastic band. So whether or not you have a clear plastic cover, if you can substitute it with anything clear, they can make a barrier to keep both heat and moisture in. That's what you want to do there. Pardon?
We said that we also needed flower seeds if we had them.
Yes.
And so I got this, which has got little containers in it. So where do I put the seeds in it? Because I got soil and then I got the containers.
Excellent. So how big it needs to be and how many seeds, it kind of depends what you're growing and how much of it you want to grow. So
there was a kit with sachets of seeds.
Okay, and like in your case, what kind of plant is it?
Well, there's French marigold, pansies, cornflower, dianthus, calendula, and nasturtium.
Okay, so those are all flowers. So one piece of advice would be to choose the size of it and how many seeds you pick, based on about how separate you'd want the adult flowers to be. So in that case, I guess you probably want to have it for most of those flower types about 2 centimeters apart between seeds. So like judge the size of your container and how many.
Yeah, well, I got these things, so I put 1 flower per thing.
So the amount or the depth of soil, it doesn't need to be much at this stage because it's just to be able to keep the seeds moist so they start putting roots in. There will be a bit of a difference depending on like where you live and what your goal is afterwards. So in my case, I live in an apartment and I have a balcony and a windowsill. So what I'm planting in, that'll be probably where these plants are going to stay. And that'll also influence what I could plant because I won't be able to have something that has like a really big root structure or that would need a lot of space. So in that case, I'm going to have a fair bit here. Whereas if you're going to transfer it to a bigger pot and outdoors, and I'm so it kind of depends on how much room you have and what the end goal will be. And I see Renée-Claude appears to be back. If you're ready to take over, let me know.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm having internet issues today.
Oh, no worries. It happens to me all the time. Luckily, it hasn't kicked me out of any of my own camps so far, but it's an issue that all of us are going through at these times.
So I see you've been talking a little bit about what you should put in there or what you shouldn't. I'll be putting some lettuce because I'm, like Michael said, I'm probably going to be keeping it in my little greenhouse container. Let's do this again. So I've got my little bottom. We have to add some soil if you haven't done that already. Okay. Now my soil is quite dry, and so I'm gonna have to add some water. So if your soil does not feel moist, right, your seeds are gonna need to be moist to germinate. So you're gonna have to put a little bit of water in here. Not too much, because just like us, plants like water. They like to have a little bath, but they don't like to be underwater too long because our roots need to breathe. So roots need oxygen in order to work and to absorb nutrients, absorb food from the soil. So you really have to make sure that your soil is nice and moist. I'll just bring this down so you can see. So I am just mixing it with my hand here, getting it nice and moist, but you can see it's not soaking wet. We don't want it to be like mud. You want it to just be like chocolate cake. Once that's done, okay.
And just a reminder to anyone mixing it with their hands, you want it to be a different hand than you're going to be touching your computer with. So don't get dirt or soil or anything all over your computer or your iPad.
That is a good point. I was using a spoon to help me, actually.
Oh, I thought I heard you say use your hands, so now my hands.
I use my hands after my spoon, yeah. It goes better with your hand. Okay, so I'm planting some lettuces. So one thing that's fun about lettuce and greens and herbs is you can kind of just sprinkle your seeds onto your soil and then cover it up again. And that's all you really need to do. You won't need to make holes or make lines. You can just kind of take a little handful if you're using something like, if you're doing spinach or lettuce, or even if you're doing carrots, you can plant like this. So you can see my seeds are really, really small. They're almost like dust. So I will just sprinkle them onto my soil or my growing medium. Or if you don't have soil, you know, cotton balls or paper towel will also do the job. But your plants might not grow for as long because they're not going to have the nutrients, the plant food that they need in order to grow. So once I've put all my little seeds in there, I'm just going to put another little tiny layer of soil on top. Not too much. And you don't want to pack it down because your seeds will need to pop out through the soil. And if it's too compacted, if it's too hard, they might not have enough energy to pop out of the soil and survive. So once you have put your seeds in there, I'm just going quickly here because our session's going to end soon. You put your lid on top and you make sure that it's closed. Okay? And you're done. Now you have to make sure to put this in a sunny window and don't open it. You won't even need to water it because the water that's already in it, okay, it's going to get nice and warm in here because of the sun. And the water is going to evaporate from the soil and condense on the lid. So it's going to make little water droplets everywhere on the lid. And these are going to rain back down onto your soil. So you don't actually need to water it until your little seedlings have started to show some green. So once your plants start to grow a little bit, once you start to see some leaves, you'll want to remove your lid and then you'll start to water it when it looks dry. Okay, so I have an example here of one of my little plantlets that has been growing in rock wool, and this is a bean, so we can see the parts we were looking at earlier, but you can also see that the roots are starting to come out. I'll just get my little seedling tray. So this here is one that I made, a little mini greenhouse that I made not too long ago. And this is spinach. And you can see how much it's grown. So in a couple of weeks, I'll probably be eating some spinach. Okay, so once it starts to look like this, you do not need your cover anymore for your little greenhouse. Your greenhouse has done its job. Your seeds have sprouted and they're happy. Now you can just let them grow in the sun. Now make sure you put them in the sun, otherwise they're going to get very, very long and thin and weak, and it won't be very good results. So they definitely need a lot of light.
And I have a question that some people might be wondering for the spinach. Do you need to transplant that to anything bigger, or can it grow to the size you're going to eat it just right in that container?
It could grow to the size where you eat it in this size of container. Because spinach doesn't have very high nutrient needs, it doesn't need a lot of plant food, it can grow to edible size in a little container like this. With a tomato though, you wouldn't have as much luck because tomatoes need a lot of food to make tomatoes. So after a certain time in here, they would have eaten all of the plant food and they won't be able to grow anymore. So spinach though, it will keep growing and you'll be able to have a harvest.
Excellent. Now, I'd imagine it's the same for most lettuces and also herbs and things like that. So those could be great things for people to be planting on windowsills and balconies. Like if you don't have room outdoors or access to a lot of soil, those are plants that usually work pretty well, right?
Absolutely. Those are great ideas. And that's why I'm doing lettuce and spinach in here, just so that I don't need to transplant it and then I can have something to eat. Should I show
Excellent.
you a little video of my plants growing? I don't know if we have time.
We're a little bit over time, but if people are okay sticking for a minute, it was pretty cool to see. So I'd say it's worth showing it. And just
Okey-doke.
as it's getting queued up, if anyone has any questions about their home planting projects, think of those, because we'll give you a minute quickly to answer those after we see the time lapse. If there's any questions for advice on how to grow things at home.
Yeah, any questions, welcome. I've done this, so I've learned a lot over that time. Okay, so I'm sharing with you a video I made of my plants growing. So the little plant I just showed you, the little bean, this is 2 days of growth, okay? So here we go. You see the little plants dancing? So I put a little camera next to my plants and had to take a picture every minute for 2 full days, so 48 hours. And you can see the little plants are growing very, very slowly, but you can see as they wiggle and move, and especially the spinach off to the side here, you can see how it's wiggling and moving. So we can't see them move and wiggle, but they are moving. It's just very, very, very slowly. So if you have a camera at home, that's something you can try. I'm using a little action camera to do these time lapses.
That's excellent. Thank you. And do we have any questions from people at home about how to be growing things in their own home? So,
Are we gonna do the beans or not?
like planting the beans in the greenhouse?
Yeah.
So I used beans in mine. It depends if you had other seeds that you planted, like you used those. In my case, because I didn't have a lot of seeds and because I had beans, because we were doing the bean dissection, I planted beans in mine. So if you have room in
So
your...
it's the same thing.
Yep, the same method to plant it. And it's just, once the beans grow bigger, that'd be one of the ones you'd need a bit more soil for. So either moving that to a bigger pot, or if you have anywhere outside where you could plant it. So it can work to start things off. And I'm not actually sure what I'm going to do once mine gets bigger, how I'm going to get around that problem. But getting it to start growing is kind of the first step.
If you have just one bean in that container, it should be fine to do its whole life in there. But if you have many, many beans, then they might use up all of the food in the soil before they've grown to adulthood. So just one could be okay. And you can actually plant the beans that you eat. So I have a bag of dried beans here. I could plant one of these and get a baby plant, okay? So they're seeds just like any other seeds, and they're actually alive too. So the beans that we buy that are dry and that we eat, they're just like the seeds that we buy in little packets to plant. Go ahead.
Do we plant the soaked beans or the dry beans?
You can plant either or. You can plant your soaked ones. They'll just grow faster now because they've already sucked up all the water that they need. So that's a trick you can use when you're planting seeds in your garden or in your mini greenhouse. You can soak them ahead of time. So that way they've already soaked up all the moisture that they need to start their life, to start being active. So they actually end up growing faster. So that's a trick that gardeners use. Let's say you're a little late starting your seeds, you can just soak them overnight and that'll give them a nice kickstart. So yes, you can plant your soaked beans, but be careful. If it's one of the beans that you dissected, you could plant it and see what happens, but you might not have the best success.
Are there any other questions before we say goodbye? Okay, and I'm just gonna share my screen for a second to mention there's a couple of links in the accompanying documents. Some of them are ones from Renée-Claude at the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum that explain if you need further explanations on some of the things we did about how to sprout. And there's also an Earth Day celebration from friends of mine at the Exploratorium in California that happens later today because it's midday for them there. So if you're interested in more information on that, you can look at those to go further. And of course, if you have any questions for us, feel free to send me an email after the session, like even in the next couple of weeks if you're trying to grow something. And if I don't know the answer, I'll get a hold of Renée-Claude or someone else who does. So please do feel free to contact us with more questions. With that, I think I'll wrap up there because we're already 10 minutes late and I don't want to keep you guys any longer. But I want to wish everyone a happy Earth Day again. And I want to thank Renée-Claude again for joining us. It's been amazing having her back now for a second session where she shared some things. So she's the only one who's been on twice so far, I think. And hopefully we'll convince her to come back more times in the future. So thank you again for joining us from Ottawa, Canada, and happy Earth Day, everyone.
Happy Earth Day.